Escape 26. Grace lay on the edge of John Claude's green top, pretending to be asleep. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Butch walk over to his shelter and crawl into it, like a bear returning to its den. The two men sat by the fire quarreling about who would take the first guard duty. They finally settled it by cutting cards. Philip lost with a 3 of diamonds to Jacques' Jack of Hearts. Soon the night animals' sound were mingled with Butch and Jacques' snores, and Philip's shuffling the deck of cards over and over again. If he didn't stop shuffling and fall asleep soon, Grace knew her plan was doomed. An hour passed, and the monotonous shuffling continued. She had put enough sleeping pill powder into their eggs to put 3 gorillas to sleep. But now she was worried that the powder hadn't mixed evenly, and Philip hadn't gotten his share. She lay perfectly still, using Laurel's gaze anchoring technique to help pass the time and dull her terror. At the end of the wire, she saw herself safely back on Cryptos with Marty, Wolf, and Laurel. They were gathered in the living room, looking out the window at the Pacific Ocean. Oddly, boarding school was no longer in the picture. She couldn't imagine going back there now that she knew that Wolf was her father. She recalled the first time he had seen her, and his look of astonishment. And the following morning, when she caught him crying on the sofa in the library, how was he going to explain everything that had happened? No wonder he had been so awkward around her. The shuffling finally came to a stop. Very slowly, she turned her head and breathed a sigh of relief. Philip was slumped over, sound asleep. Grace got to her feet and started towards Butch's crude shelter. Marcelito moved through the jungle like a ghost, ducking under branches and clambering over fallen trees without a sound. Marty followed like a derailed locomotive engine, breaking branches, tripping, cursing, and hoping Marcelito was leading him to Grace. He still wasn't sure if his guide understood the big picture. After nearly an hour of this, Marcelito stopped and waited for Marty to catch up. Marcelito pointed to his back and motioned for him to take it off. At first, Marty thought that he was offering to carry it for him, which he didn't think was a good idea. The pack was nearly as big as Marcelito, but that wasn't what Marcelito had in mind. He took the pack and scrapped it along trees and vines, and pointed to his ear. "I get it," Marty said. "It makes too much noise." Marcelito hung it on a branch, then pointed to Marty's machete. Marty shook his head. "No way. I needed to get through the jungle." Marcelito made wild slashing movements with his arm and again pointed to his ear. Marty sighed and hung the machete next to the pack. Marcelito squinted at him, then covered his eyes in mock pain, as if he were being blinded. It took Marty a while to realize that he was referring to the headlamp he was wearing. It's the only way I can see where I'm going. Masalito continued his blind man charade. Okay, I'll compromise. I'll turn it off, but I'm leaving it on my forehead. Marty turned it off, wondering how long it would take him to smack face first into a tree. He wished he had brought along a climbing helmet from the sky house. If you ask me to strip down to my underwear, I'm not doing it. And I'm taking this with me. He opened the pack and took out the small sketchbook he had brought along. I have a feeling I'm going to need it to talk to you later. Masalita said something, then scrambled up a tree like a gecko and disappeared. Where are you going? Marty called up after him, but Masalito didn't answer. Marty sat down and leaned against the tree. As he sorted insects, he thought about Noah Blackwood. He still found it hard to believe that he was Grace's grandfather, or that Wolf was her father for that matter. There must have been an important reason for his parents to have kept this a secret all these years. But he couldn't for the life of him think of what it was. 20 minutes went by, and he began to wonder if he was supposed to have followed Masalito up the tree. After another 20 minutes, he started to think that Masalito had ditched him. He stood up and was about to start climbing when Masalito dropped to the ground right in front of him. You scared me to death. Masalito smiled, then squatted down in front of him and started pounding what looked like a chunk of vine with a rock. A terrible smell filled the air. What's it for? Masalito looked up from his rook, then made a buzzing noise and waved his hands around his head. Bugs? Marty looked around and saw that there wasn't an insect anywhere near them. Wow. Masalito took the ball of smelly pulp and started smearing it all over Marty's body. Despite the stink, Marty didn't resist. Not only was the juice keeping the insects away, but he felt instant relief from the itching that had plagued him for the past few days. Masalito pantomimed that he wanted Marty to follow him closely through the woods and to do everything that he did. At first, Marty had a hard time even seeing Masalito in the dim moonlight, let alone mimicking him. But after a while, his eyes adjusted to the dark, and the shadowy pantomime became easier. And he noticed something else. The farther they went, and the faster they moved, the better he felt. Grace was experiencing the opposite feeling. She was in Bush's shelter, so close to him she could smell his breath. She had quietly searched his pack and every square inch of the shelter's floor, including the insides of 2 pairs of boots, and still had not found the gizmo. The only place she hadn't looked was in his pockets, which was why she felt so anxious. Twice he had stopped snoring, and Grace had held perfectly still until the terrible noise resumed. She knew Marty would approach this delicate operation much differently from how she was handling it. He would simply hit Butch in the head with a large rock, find the gizmo, and walk off with it. Grace had undergone a lot of changes in the past few days, but she could not do that. Butch was lying in the hammock, his shotgun resting across his chest. She surveyed the pockets she would have to search, trying to determine which would be most likely to contain the gizmo. He was wearing army fatigues and a baggy shirt. She reached for the first shirt pocket. The top flap was buttoned. With her heart in her throat, she gingerly pushed the button through the hole and slipped her fingers inside. Butch stopped snoring. She froze and held her breath. There was something in the pocket, but it was too big to be the gizmo. After what seemed like an eternity, Butch resumed his snoring, and Grace carefully pulled the object out. It was her moleskin, which she was glad to have back, but disappointed it wasn't the gizmo. The next pocket contained Butch's wallet. She moved down the hammock to Butch's cargo pockets. In the first, she found a folding knife, which she took. And in the second pocket, to her great relief, was the gizmo. Unfortunately, as she was pulling it out, Butch turned over, pinned her arm. When she tried to pull it free, the hammock swung toward her, and Butch stopped snoring again. She now wished she had that rock, and went so far as to feel around for one with her free hand. Butch started snoring again, and her arms started going to sleep. She did not find a rock, but she remembered the knife. She opened a blade with her teeth and started cutting the hammock mesh, one square at a time, careful not to stab Butch, and hoping the whole thing didn't unravel and dump her guardian angel on the ground. The hammock held, and with tremendous relief, she took the gizmo and her moleskin back to the campfire. Felipe was still slumped over his spilled cards. Jacques was snoring away in his hammock. Jean-Claude had not moved, and to her dismay, the gray parrot had flown into camp and was hopping around the sleeping man. What if it started its terrible screeching? She prayed it wouldn't. Her immediate goal was to keep Butch and his men away from Wolf and Laurel. That's all that mattered right now. After that, she didn't know what she would do. She slipped the pack over her shoulders, then turned the gizmo on, relieved to find Marty's gray tag at the Sky House, along with bows and PDs. For once in his life, he hadn't rushed to her rescue. She thought about contacting Wolf and telling him what was going on, but then thought better of it. There would be time for that once she was safely away from the camp. But as she started to leave, two hands clamped on her ankles and pulled her feet out from under her. She hit the ground and the gizmo went flying. Apparently, Jean-Claude was feeling much better. His hands felt like iron shackles. "Let go of me, you ingrate," Grace hissed in French I saved your life." Jean-Claude was surprised that she spoke French, but he did not let her go. The girl may have saved him, but the only way he was going to make it out of Lake Tele alive was if Butch McCall deemed him worthy of being dragged out of the jungle. He tightened his grip. Grace kicked and clawed at the ground, but could not break free. She glanced in Philippe and Jacques' directions, and saw they were both awake now. Although moving very slowly, her plan was coming apart before it had even started. The parrot let out a loud screech, then hopped over and sunk his sharp black beak into Jean-Claude's remaining ear. Jean-Claude screamed and let go of Grace's ankles. Grace rolled away and got to her feet. There was a roar from Butch's shelter. He came stumbling out, but didn't make it very far. His leg was tangled in the torn hammock, and he fell flat on his face. Grace looked around for the gizmo, but didn't see it. She ran. The boot, 27. Wolf had removed his prosthetic leg and was working on it with a special toolkit he kept in his pack. "Can I help?" Laura asked. "No. This is a one-person's job. I just need to tighten the screws and make some adjustments to the hinges. It's a prototype that Ted made for me. This is the first time it's been in a swamp, and it's a little gummed up." "We'll be on relatively dry ground from now on," Laura said. "I'm glad of that," Wolf said. There's one thing you can do." He handed her the gizmo. Laura found the blue, gray, pink, and purple tags at the sky house. The earth seemed to be tucked in for the night. She hit the bow cam button. Marty left us a message. Wolf grabbed the gizmo. On the screen was a drawing of Bo and him sitting on a log. Beneath it was a note. "Wolf, Butch has Grace and the gizmo. No sign of Masalito. I'll wait for you here. Marty." Wolf swore. "I knew something was wrong. If Butch so much as—" He let the rest of the thought go, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. When he opened them, he looked back at the screen and studied Marty's drawing. "It looks like they're sitting on the Mulimo." Laura nodded in agreement. "What's it mean?" "I think he's telling us Masalito is there. And look at this." He pointed at Bo. "He's drawn her with all the tracking tags around her neck." Wolf switched back to the tracking mode and zoomed in on the 4 colors. They were right on top of one another, moving around the sky house at the exact same pace. "Marty and Masalito aren't there," Laura said. But why did Marty leave the tags at the sky house?" "Butch has a gizmo," Wolf said. "Give me your tag." Laura took it off. What are you going to do?" "Take a page out of Marty's book." He hung his and Laura's tags on a tree branch. Felipe was blabbing on about how the gray parrot had bewitched him. Jacques was yelling about how Felipe had guard duty, and Jean-Claude was holding his bleeding ear, moaning about how he was the only one alert enough to grab the girl. "All of you shut up," Butch shouted. He picked up the gizmo and checked the tags in the sky house. They were all there. Next, he clicked on the bow cam and saw Marty's note and drawing. "Oh, that's just perfect. Wolf knows we have the girl." He checked Wolf and Lola's tags and was shocked to see how close they were. The only good thing was that the tags weren't moving. He got the map out of his pack and walked over to Felipe and Jocks. Changed our plans. Our friends are making better time than I thought. I want you two to head out immediately and right here. He pointed to a spot on the map. It's a narrow land bridge over the swamp. They have to cross it to get here. Unless you think it's beyond your capabilities to dispatch a woman and a one-legged man. Felipe and Jacques assured him that it wasn't. While you're taking care of them, I'll retrieve the girl. We'll meet here. He pointed to the map again. A helicopter will pick us up this evening. What about me? Jean-Claude asked. Butch looked at him for a long time, then nodded, and turned back at Felipe and Jacques. After you take care of Wolf and Dr. Lee, come back here and pick up Jean-Claude. He looked at Felipe and shook his head in disgust. We weren't bewitched by a parrot. We were drugged by a little girl. Grace had gotten much farther than she thought, and she was worried. The whole point of her escape was to get them to follow her. As she collapsed on her hands and knees, with her lungs on fire, there were no breaking branches or shouting men. The only thing she heard was her breathing, and the jungle creatures awaking in the gray mist of another dawn. Where are they? She sat up and saw that the parrot had followed her. He was perched on the lower branch of a tree, calmly preening his feathers. I have no idea where I am, she thought, and with the gizmo gone, no way to find out. She looked up at the preening parrot. I don't suppose you know the way to the Sky House. The parrot stopped preening and made a gurgling noise. That's what I thought. Grace stood and brushed the damp leaves from her pants. If I can't find Lake Terry, I can find the Sky House. She started forward, but stopped when she discovered that the parrot was not following. Then he started to fly in the opposite direction. She nodded. Okay, I'll follow you, she said. But I hope you know where you're going. Marty lay next to Marcelito, at the edge of Butch's camp. There wasn't much to it. A couple of crude lanterns, both empty, a green top near a smoking fire, and a smell that made Marty want to retch. The camp looked as though it had been abandoned. Where are they? He whispered. Marcelito stood, strung an arrow, and motioned for Marty to stay where he was. Without making a sound, he walked toward the fire. When he got there, he kicked the green top. Someone screamed. The top flew, and the man beneath backed up like a crayfish, being pursued by a bobcat. Marcelito followed him with his arrow, pointed an inch from his eye. The man began speaking in terrified French, which was a little hard for Marty to follow, but he was able to pick up enough to hear something about Grace and Butch. The man was a wreck. Marty gently put his hand on Marcelito's taut forearm. Marcelito nodded grimly and relaxed the bow, but kept the arrow strung. Jean-Claude visibly relaxed. "What happened to you?" Muddy asked in French. "Gorilla," Jean-Claude answered. "Where's Grace?" "She went away. Butch has gone after her." "And the others?" "They have gone after the one-legged man and the woman." "Wolf and Lowell?" Jean-Claude nodded. "Why?" Jean-Claude did not answer. Marcelito pulled the arrow back again. "To kill them," Jean-Claude said. Butch McCall had not caught up to Grace. Following her tiny footprints was easy, but he was surprised at how much ground she had covered in the short time she had been gone. His satellite phone rang. He cursed himself for putting it in his pack, and considered not answering. But if he turned it off, Blackwood would know it and go into a rage. Noah did not tolerate being out of the touch with his people, no matter where they were. "Butch, yeah. How's everything going?" "Good. We'll be landing in a couple of hours. The helicopter is waiting for us. How's the weather?" "Good. How's Grace?" Butch hesitated. "She's fine." "Let me talk to her." Butch winced. "Well, she's, no one. Not even Butch McCall lied to Noah Blackwood. She slipped away early this morning." "Are you telling me that a little girl escaped from 4 grown men?" Blackwood shouted. "We couldn't very well tie her up," Butch defended himself. "That would have blown our rescue story." "Obviously, she didn't believe your story." Butch wanted to point out that it was Blackwood's story, not his. "No, sir, she didn't," he said. "Do you have any idea how important she is to me?" "Yes." "What are you doing about it?" "I'm on the trail right now," Butch said. "She won't get far." "And our friends?" Blackwood asked. "They won't be a problem." "When you find Grace, call me," Blackwood said. "Immediately." Marty explained the situation with the aid of the sketch pad. Marcelito nodded, as if he understood, and began looking at the ground. He found the footprints of the 2 men and pantomimed that they should follow them. Forget it, Marty. Was not about to leave Grace in the forest by herself, with Butch McCall after her. He pointed at Butch's big boot prints. "I'm going after Grace." Marcelito shook his head. "I have to find Grace," Marty insisted. "It'd just slow you up." He squatted down and drew a quick sketch of the sky house. "We'll wait for you here." Marcelito stared at the crude drawing for several seconds before finally nodding in agreement. They started off in separate directions, just as daylight began filtering through the canopy. Butch arrived at the spot where Grace had fallen to her hands and knees to catch her breath. He touched the faint impressions in the soft ground and smiled. She wasn't far, and with the sun up, tracking her would be easy now. He checked the location of Wolf and the boy. The boy was still at the sky house, and Wolf and the woman were in the same place they had been when he left camp. He shook his head. Something wasn't right. He checked the vidcam. The bird was flying above the canopy. No sign of people in the picture. "What are you up to, Wolf?" he thought. There was a way to find out, but before taking that path, he unlaced his boots and took off his socks. He always carried several spare socks in his pack. Wet socks kill feet. He wondered how the girl's feet were doing. As his feet air dried, he took the gizmo out and pushed the video conference icon. Wolf and Laurel had been virtually jogging through the forest since seeing Marty's message. Wolf's stump hurt, but he ignored the pain. The only thing that mattered was reaching Grace and Marty. If Blackwood got his hands on them, Wolf would never see them again. At first he didn't hear the gizmo's call above his labored breathing, and the heavy pack slapping against his back, but the sound finally filtered through, and he stopped and touched the video conference button. "Butch," he said. "Long time no see," Butch said. "Caught any great rights lately?" Wolf did not answer. It was obvious Butch had not gotten over the fact that he had failed to bring Blackwood his prize shark. And that was just the beginning of their rivalry. What Butch had really wanted to catch was Rose. Wolf could see by his expression that his hatred had not dimmed over the years. "Where's Grace? This little pocket computer is really something," Butch said. "I've got to hand it to you and Ted." "Where's Grace?" Wolf repeated. Lord joined him. "The old man is very upset with you," Butch said. "First you take his daughter and get her killed. Then you neglect to tell him that he has a granddaughter. I wouldn't want to be in your boots." "I mean it, Butch. I want her back. Any of you so much as—" "Harm her?" Butch interrupted. "Not likely, pal. You forget who I work for. Who you used to work for. You know I can't get over how much he looks like Rose. Bring back memories. Let me talk to her." Butch shook his head. "No way. You've had 12 years to talk to her. It's his grandfather's turn now, and he's a pretty smooth talker." Wolf stared at the screen, wishing he could jump through it and throttle him. "Is this dumb?" Butch asked. "I imagine it's getting pretty sore. Doesn't seem to have slowed you down, though. And by the way, nice try on the tracking tags. Did you hang them in a tree? Did you think that would throw me off? You've always underestimated me. Serious mistake. The only reason your sweaty face is still talking is because Noah had some use for you, but not anymore. I wouldn't be surprised if he puts your carcass in one of his dioramas." "At least let me see her," Wolf pleaded. "I just want to make sure she's okay." Butch smiled. "No can do, pal. She's indisposed at the moment. But I'll tell you what I will do. We're out here looking for Mokolala Mbembe, and we're having a little problem finding it. I mean, you'd think a sauropod would stick out like a sore thumb. Anyway, the rumor is that you might know where we can find it." "An exchange," Wolf said hopefully. "I wouldn't go that far, Blackwood has his heart set on showing Grace the wonders of the world. No, what I had in mind is letting you have a final conversation with her. If you could give me an idea of where I might find the beast." "You know, I'll find it anyway." "I don't know where it is," Wolf said. "Too bad. But of course I don't believe you. It would be out of character for you to mount an expedition to the Congo for the fun of it. This isn't Disneyland. The only reason I came here was to find Marcelito before you did. You came here so he wouldn't tell us where to find Mokolele Mbembe. How much is Blackwood paying you? A lot more than you can afford, Butch answered. Look, I'd better get going. If you change your mind about that conversation with Grace, give me a call back. And because I'm a generous guy, I'll pass on some more information. It will save that stump of yours somewhere in Tyr. Butch looked at his watch. By the time you get here, we'll be long gone. I gotta go. Call me sometime. The screen went blank. Wolf stared at it for a long time before looking up at Laurel. How long before we get there? 3 or 4 hours, maybe a little longer. Will started walking, and oddly the pain in his stump had gone away. Marty had overheard most of the conversation between Butch and Wolf. He was hiding behind a fallen tree, not 20 feet from where Butch was now, massaging his bare feet. He knew he wasn't going to get another chance like this. He crept forward, carrying a large stick which snagged on a vine, alerting Butch. He reached for his shotgun, a little too late. The blow to his bald head wasn't hard enough to knock Butch out, but it gave Marty enough time to scoop up one of his boots, the gizmo, and run. Butch yelled. There was a gunshot. Marty didn't look back. He ran for at least a mile, coming to a stop near a pond. He threw the boot into the water and watched the crocodiles fight over it. While he caught his breath and figured out what he was going to do next. Will Butch continue after Grace? Marty asked himself. Try to catch me? Or will he head back to camp to get another pair of boots? Providing he has spares. Which I hope he doesn't. He listened for the sound of pursuit, but heard nothing. Satisfied that Butch had taken option number 3, he switched the gizmo on and called Wolf. Wolf's face appeared immediately, and the scowl on it changed to shock when he saw who it was. How did, he stuttered. I swept it from him, Marty said, along with his right boot. Or maybe it was his left. Butch is nobody to be fooling around. The picture and sound started to break up. What? The picture came back on. My battery's getting weak, and I don't have any spares. We'll have to make this brief. Butch sent 2 guys to kill you and Laurel, Marty said. When did they leave Butch's camp? I don't know. Messaliter is on their trail. You mean he's not with you? Wolf raised his voice in alarm. Not anymore. And Grace. She got away from them sometime this morning. Butch was following her when I got his boot. Wolf sighed. You would better start from the beginning. Marty quickly explained what had happened. When he finished, Wolf stared at the screen for a while before responding. I think I know where they're going to set up their ambush. Can you go around them? Wolf shook his head. It would take too much time. Don't worry about us. You'll need to find Grace. I'll find her, Marty said. Do you have that silent whistle? Marty took out of his pocket and held it in front of the gizmo. Good. Call Ved in to you. He's closer to you right now than he is to us. If he sees you, we'll know where you are. He also might spot Grace, and you can track to his signal. If he spots Butch, stay away from him. I will. When you find Grace, I want you to go directly to the Sky House. Okay. Marty was about to turn the gizmo off, but found himself hesitating. "Are you Grace's father?" "I am," Will said. "And Noah Blackwood?" "He's her grandfather." Marty nodded. "Be careful." Reunion 28. Grace was disheartened. Her plan had failed miserably. For the past hour, she had been making as much noise as she possibly could, hoping to draw Butch and his men away from Wolf and Laurel. But none of them had appeared. They were either the worst trackers in the world, or they had decided to take care of Wolf and Laurel first, knowing then they would have all the time they needed to find her. On top of this, she had no idea where she was. She continued to follow the parrot. She didn't know what else to do. With great caution, Marty worked his way back to where he had hit Butch on the head. As he'd hoped, it looked like Butch had returned to camp for fresh footwear. In the muddy trail, there were clear imprints of a left boot and a right sock heading in that direction. Following Grace's path through the forest was not easy. The step was much lighter than Butch's, and Marty would sometimes lose the trail for hundreds of yards before picking it up again. Grace was heading roughly toward the Sky House, but in a crazy way. She would follow clear trail for a while, then inexplicably leave the trail, breaking through thick foliage for a time, then pick up another trail, and repeat the process. If she was trying to throw Butch off her track, this was not the way to do it. When they got back to Crypto's, he was going to give her some lessons in how to ditch a tracker. The subject had been thoroughly covered at survival camp. Every few minutes, he stopped to check the vid cam and blow the whistle. The raven was flying above the canopy, but so far he hadn't spotted Grace or Butch. Marty heard Grace before he saw her. She was talking to someone. He wondered if Butch had tricked him with the footprints heading back to camp. Silently, he crawled forward. Grace was talking to a tree. At least that's what it looked like. He stepped out into the open. Grace screamed in delight, ran over and threw her arms around him. "They're going to kill Wolf and Laurel," she said breathlessly. "We have to warn them. Noah Blackwood is on his way to pick me up. Butch is..." Marty managed to separate himself from her iron grip and held her at arm's length. "You look pretty good for someone who's been kidnapped." "Did you hear what I said about Wolf and Laurel?" He took the gizmo out. "I already warned them." "How did you get that?" Marty explained what had happened since Butch had taken her from the Sky House, leaving out the trunk and photos of Rose. He didn't know if she knew that Wolf was her father, and he wasn't exactly sure how to broach the subject. When he finished, Grace explained what had happened to her, leaving out the reason she had fainted, her nightmare that was actually a memory, and the parrot who was still perched in the branch above them. Marty hadn't noticed him yet. Their updates were followed by an awkward silence, something neither of them had ever experienced with each other. "What's the matter?" Grace finally asked. "Nothing," Marty answered innocently. "I was just thinking we should get moving toward the Sky House. It won't take long for Butch to lace up his boots and get back on our trail. He was worried about Butch, but Grace didn't believe this was what he was thinking. Did you happen to go up to the second floor of the Sky House? Yeah, Marty admitted. Grace's blue eyes began to well with tears. So you saw that nursery. Marty turned away. She gently turned him back. He had begun to cry as well. She told him about the dream. When she finished, she said, "It doesn't make any difference, Marty. As far as I'm concerned, you're still my brother." Marty wiped his tears away and grinned. "Older brother," he said. "What?" He told her about the photographs he had found in the trunk. One of them was you celebrating your first birthday. You'll be 13 2 weeks. He checked the date on his watch. From yesterday. Butch McCall was in a foul mood. His head hurt where the boy had cracked him with the branch. His right foot was on fire from the vicious thorn he had stepped on his way back to camp. And he was still groggy from the sleeping pills. When he arrived at camp, he kicked the sleeping Jean-Claude awake. "Why didn't you grab the boy?" "What boy?" Jean-Claude said innocently. "I've been unconscious since you left. I'm not feeling—" "Give it a rest. The boy was here, along with the pygmy. Their tracks all over the place." "What happened to your head?" Jean-Claude asked. Butch didn't answer. He limped over to his lean-to and put on his boots, then started following the pygmy and the boy's tracks. He came to the place where the pygmy had gone after his men, and the boy had followed Grace. He swore and tried to reach the men on the walkie-talkie, but there was no answer. They were too far away. His brain told him to follow the pygmy and make sure he didn't interfere with his plan for Wolf and Lowell. His battered pride told him to go after the kids who had duped him. His pride won out. "Where are Wolf and Lowell?" Grace asked. "I don't know. They took their tags off. Wolf said they would be at the Sky House this afternoon." "Why were you talking to a tree when I got here?" "I wasn't." She pointed up. "I told you there was a parrot we've met," Marty said. "It's an African gray parrot, sometimes called a Congo gray parrot. And you didn't tell me that it talked." "I didn't know till yesterday." What did it say to you?" "Rose is back," Marty answered. "That's what it said to me," Grace said. "It seems to want to show me something." "We are not going to follow the parrot," Marty protested. "Wolf was very specific about us going directly to the Sky House." "Aren't we going in that direction?" "More or less. Aren't you curious?" Marty looked up at the parrot. "A little," he admitted. "I've been following your tracks, and the bird does seem to have something in mind." Grace smiled. "We'd better call Wolf." He handed her the gizmo. It was the first time Grace had seen Wolf since learning he was her father, and a stream of emotions filled her when she saw his tired face on the little screen. She felt concern, fear, and affection for the man looking at her. "Hi," she said shyly. "Hi," Wolf said. "I'm sure glad to see you. Marty's a good man to have around." "Yes, he is." She glanced at Marty, who was beaming at the compliment. "How did you get away from Butch?" She told him about the sleeping pills. Wolf laughed, then asked if they were headed to the Sky House. "More or less," Grace said. We'll be there soon. Noah Black was on his way here in a helicopter. A helicopter, Will said. That might come in handy. Bertha. The gizmo screen blinked off. His battery's gone dead, Marty said. The gizmo came back on. What about Butch? Wolf asked. We haven't seen him. You've got to keep moving. We will. My battery's just about gone, so I can't explain everything. But things are looking up. Just get to the Sky Hills, and we'll be there soon. What about Butch's men? Don't worry about them. I have a pretty good idea of where they're going to be rating. We'll get around them. How is Laurel? I'm about 150 yards behind her, and I'm afraid if I don't catch up soon, she'll leave me behind. In other words, she's doing better than I am. I know you're my father, Grace said, and it's okay. The words had just slipped out, and they weren't exactly the words she wanted to use, but it was too late to take them back. Wolf stared at the screen for several seconds. Then his face broke into a broad grin, which completely transformed his appearance. Okay, is absolutely wonderful, he said. The Stream, 29. Grace and Marty had been following the parrot for half an hour. I think this parrot's crazy, Marty said. He looked at his watch. 15 minutes, then we head to the Sky House, on our own. I'm starving. Grace did not argue. She was getting hungry too. 5 minutes later, Marty said, Do you smell that? Yes, the stench was impossible to ignore. It smells like Butch's camp. We're a long way from there, Marty said. They walked a little farther and stopped at a small stream. Marty pointed to a tree on the other side with several well-fed vultures perched in it. I think there's a snack bar open somewhere around here. Grace was not interested in the vultures. She turned around. The pair was perched in a tree, about 10 feet to the left. She walked over to it. The parrot ruffled its feathers and started preening. Marty joined her. What's going on? This is the tree, Grace said. What are you talking about? Grace sat down next to the tree and told him how her mother had been killed and how Wolf had lost his leg. All these years, I thought it was a nightmare. But it really happened. My mother set me in the branches of this tree. She crossed the stream there. She pointed. A Mokalemembe came out of those bushes to the right. I think it was the flash from a camera that made it mad. It picked her up. Grace covered her face and began to sob. Marty held her hand for a while, then stood up. Let's cross over and take a closer look. Grace shook her head. You've come this far, Marty said. You might as well finish it. We're not going to be back here anytime soon. If you don't look now, you'll regret it. Reluctantly, Grace followed him across the shallow stream, with the vultures looking on. This is far enough, Wolf said, taking his pack off and sitting down. Laura sat down next to him. Wolf consulted his gizmo. If Marty's information is accurate, they're waiting for us here. He pointed to the land bridge. It's the only way through this area. We could go around, Laura said. That would take at least another day, which we don't have. Black was on his way. And I'm worried about Masalito. He didn't follow these guys for the fun of it. He'll try to take them out, and he might get hurt in the process. The original reason for this trip was to protect him. I suspect he's somewhere on the other side of the gap, trying to figure out what to do. What do you suggest? Actually, Grace gave me the idea. He took a leather case out of his pack and unzipped it. Inside was a pistol. You can't fight them with that, Laurel protested. I don't intend to fight them, Rose said. I'm going to put them to sleep. This is a tranquilizer gun. Why did you bring a tranquilizer gun? Mokalele Mbembe. I was under the impression that you didn't believe. Not entirely, Rolf confessed. A cryptozoologist can't afford to be completely skeptical. He patted his pack. I also brought along everything a veterinarian might need to treat an ailing dinosaur. What do you want me to do? If they start firing, I want you to run through that gap as fast as you can. And leave you by yourself? Laura protested. One of us has to get through. And I hate to admit it, but you'll be better in the woods than I am. You'll have the best chance of reaching Grace and Marty. Also, I don't speak pygmy. You'll do. You're the only one who can explain what's going on. Laura held his gaze for a moment. Uncomfortable, Rolf looked back down at the gizmo and checked the vid cam. He swore. Butch was looking at the ground, his bald head in sharp contrast to the greenery surrounding him. He's tracking them, Rolf said grimly, and quickly checked Vid's location. And if he's close to the Grace and Marty, they're still a long way from the Sky House. Almost as if he could hear, Butch looked directly up at Vid and gave him a broad smile, waved, then walked out of the camera's view. This is where Mokalele Mbembe came out? Marty asked. He was on his knees in front of the wall of vines Grace has pointed to. Yes, Grace said. And you're making me a little nervous, sitting in front of it like that. Nothing bigger than a dukkha has come through here in years. It's all overgrown. But this is where the horrible smell is coming from. At least it's a lot stronger down here than it is anywhere else. The gizmo rang. He took it out of his pocket. What are you doing? Wolf asked. You should be at the Sky House by now. Butch is on your trail. Where is he? Marty asked with alarm. I'm not sure, but we just saw him on the vid cam. Vid isn't cluck cluck cluck. Vid landed right next to him and looked up at the vultures with suspicion. Gotta go, Marty said, stuffing the gizmo into his pocket. He stood and listened. He didn't hear anything unusual, but that didn't mean Butch wasn't close. The parrot flew from the tree on the other side of the stream, landed next to Vid, and bit him. Vid flew away. We have to get out of here. Which way? Marty looked down at the vines, where the smell was coming from. We'll hide in here until the coast is clear. After you. A few days earlier, there was no way Grace would have gone first. She squeezed through the vines on her hands and knees. Grace had a much easier time wriggling through the bush than Marty did. She emerged from the tangle several minutes before her cousin, and found herself in a sculpted tunnel of vines and branches. Light filtered through the domed ceiling like sunlight, flowing through cut glass in a cathedral. The ground had been packed hard and was clear of growth, as if it had been weeded. It was so beautiful that she nearly forgot the terrible stench. Their father's backpack came through the vines, followed by Marty's arms, head and shoulders. Grace took his hands and helped pull him free. The parrot hopped through right after him. "This wasn't one of my better ideas," he said, brushing a spider off his face. "I don't know," Grace said. "At least we are safe from Butch in here." Marty stood and was just as impressed with their surroundings as Grace. I've never seen anything like it. In fact, I never heard of anything like it." He looked up at the dumb ceiling. "I guess the tunnel was made of mokolele memebe. After all these years, you would think it would be a little more overgrown." "A lot more overgrown," Grace said nervously. Marty put the pack on. "At least Big M hasn't used this as an exhibit in a while." "What should we do?" "I wish Bo was here," Marty said. "This is a perfect job for a scout." They started down the tunnel. This is where we part company," Wolf whispered. He and Lola were hiding behind a fallen tree. He pointed to the narrow land bridge. "They're up there somewhere. I'm going to go straight ahead. I want you to swing to the right and right. When you hear the commotion, run through the gap." "I still think I'll be fine," Wolf interrupted. "They expect us to come pounding through here like a couple of elephants. I'll have the tranquilizer dot in them before they know what happened. As soon as they're out, I'll catch up with you and Mesalito." Laura gave him a hug, then began working her way to the right. Wolf took his pack off and began filing the dots with tranquilizer. The dot pistol was virtually silent, but he knew he would only have a chance for 2 shots, perhaps 3. He wished that tranquilizers worked like they did in the movies, with the animal collapsing as soon as it was hit. But the truth was that it took time, 10 to 15 minutes, for the drug to take effect. This meant he would have to stay concealed or run until the men were down. His preparations were interrupted by the loud roar of a jet passing overhead. "What was that?" Grace asked. "Sounded like a jet," Marty said, hoping that's all it was. It was loud. "Yeah," Marty's voice was a little shaky. "Do you remember what Mokolele Mbebe sounds like?" "Yes," Grace answered, "but it didn't sound anything like that." Marty breathed a sigh of relief. "Where's the parrot?" "Up ahead somewhere." They continued down the twisting vine tunnel, which was much longer than they thought it would be. Wolf crept forward. Every 20 feet he stopped for several minutes to watch and listen. The closer he got to the bridge, the more he worried. What if they were waiting on the other side? What if they were hiding in the swamp, waiting for them to cross? If they were on the other side, he wouldn't be able to reach them. The effective range of the tranquilizer's pistol was only about 30 feet. And what about Grace and Marty? Had Butch caught up with them? He was tempted to check in on them, but now wasn't the time. Why hadn't he thought to bring more batteries with him? He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He knew better than to let his mind wander during a stalk. He crawled forward a few more feet, then stopped at first. At first, he did not recognize the sound. It came from his left, subtle, but persistent. Cards, he thought. Someone is shuffling a deck of playing cards. He crawled toward the sound very slowly and picked up the faint smell of cigarette smoke. Just deal, a man said in French. When they're shuffled, a second man responded. They were sitting across from each other, with a flat rock between them. Wolf was too far away for a clean shot. He worked his way around toward a large moss-covered log to the right, taking his time, stopping every couple of feet to make sure they hadn't heard him. Their guns were leaned up against a tree, out of easy reach. The pistol only held one dart at a time. He would have to reload between shots. He hoped he would have time before they got to the shotguns. He finally reached the log. Beneath it was an opening, just big enough for him to stick the pistol through. He slipped a dart into the breech and held the other dart in his teeth. Clock, clock, clock. Butch looked up irritably at the raven and the vultures, then squatted in front of where Marty and Grace had crawled through the tightly packed vines. It would take me hours to cut my way through there. He sniffed the air. Something dead. Big and dead. And it didn't get in there the same way the brats had crawled. He glanced back up at the vultures. 4 of them. Where there are 4, there are dozens. Butch set off to find the rest of them. Felipe jumped up and screamed. His cards went flying. Quiet, Jacques hissed. They'll hear us. I've been bitten by a snake, Philip screamed. Where? Jacques started looking around in a panic. A snake could bite 2 people as easily as it could 1. He started toward the shotgun, but stopped when a stinging pain erupted from the back of his thigh. He reached down and ripped the barbed dart out. It's not a snake, he said, holding the aluminum shaft out for Felipe to see. Felipe stopped jumping around and stared at the shaft, then reached back and pulled the dart out of his butt. As enjoyable as the scene was, Wolf did not stick around to see any more. As soon as they got over the shock, they would come looking for him. He backed away from the log, hoping the distraction had been enough for Lowell to slip over the bridge.